Future. I'm your moderator, Armstrong Williams. President Joe Biden is wasting no time making his mark on the country. From transgenders back in the military to the Keystone Pipeline, even things that are impacting education and mask and true school choice. He's even reinstating and expanding the SNAP program. He's passed 30 executive orders since being in office less than a week. We'll talk about that with Bruce Fein and our panel of journalists. But first, we had a chance to sit down with former Ambassador Seaborn Gray, who's the legal counsel to George Bush, to talk about impeachment that's less than a week away. What of this impeachment and where it will go? We're going to discuss that and a little from Bruce Fein, our constitutional law expert on this issue. But first, let's hear what former legal counsel Boyd Gray had to say about this upcoming conviction trial.
This is the Armstrong Williams Show. This talking to the former legal counsel to President Bush about the conviction and trial of President Trump, now that he's no longer a sitting president. Ambassador Gray.
Well, the question, since he's been impeached and now it moves to the Senate for trial, the question is, can he be tried, even though he's no longer the president? And I think the answer is constitutionally no, because the Constitution contemplates that impeachment is for the purpose of removing a president from office. And he is not the president, and he's not in office. And so therefore, I don't think there's any jurisdiction. And if there is to be any trial, I don't think the Chief Justice, the implication I've gotten from listening to the news is I don't think he will preside, which is a pretty good indication of a jurist that he, not being president, doesn't require the presence of the Chief Justice, or doesn't contemplate the presence of the Chief Justice as the presiding judge. The reasoning given by people that say that the Constitution should be read to contemplate trials of departed presidents is because it can't be, they say, that a president can resign simply to avoid trial and conviction. But that is historically grossly inaccurate. That's exactly what Nixon did. He was facing certain conviction in the Senate, and he resigned. And no one said, gosh, we ought to go ahead and impeach him or try him and convict him anyway. No one ever discussed it. No one ever raised it. No one ever even thought about it. So that's why I think it's improper. There will be probably, I don't know, this is all new, a motion to dismiss at the beginning before the trial starts. And if Schumer can get 17 Republican votes, he will defeat the motion to dismiss. But I'm skeptical. I don't know. I haven't done any vote counts. I haven't talked to anybody in the Senate. I don't know. I'm just skeptical from what I read that he will get 17 Republican votes, and that will presumably end it. And if it doesn't, then there will probably be an effort to go to the Supreme Court.
Thank you, Ambassador Gray.
So, Bruce Fein, Donald Trump is no longer a president. We have people who are supposedly constitutional law experts who are so contradictory, they're all over the place. And I'm sure you're about to give us your opinion, but Ambassador Gray, who spent 12 years as former President and Vice President Bush's legal counsel, says there's no constitutional legality for this impeachment, and he believes that what's going to happen is that there's going to be a move by Trump's lawyer for dismissal, and it's going to be over within hours.
Well, with the highest respect I have for Boyden, both professionally and personally, I have to part company with him on this matter. There is a precedent. It's not exactly, but it's closely on point. In 1876, then Secretary of War Henry Belknap resigned. He was nevertheless impeached by the House after the resignation, and he was tried in the Senate. He made a motion in the Senate. Since a procedural motion, it didn't take 2/3, just a simple majority, to dismiss the case because he was no longer in office and couldn't be impeached, since the whole purpose of impeachment to echo Mr. Gray, was to prevent or to remove someone from office. He wasn't in office anymore. And the Senate voted 37-29 against that argument. It went forward and had a complete impeachment trial and vote. They didn't get 2/3 on conviction, but they did hold the trial. Moreover, there's a difference, I think, between the situation of Mr. Trump and Mr. Nixon. Remember, President Nixon was elected twice. To disqualify him from holding future office if they went forward with an impeachment proceeding, which is the only remedy left since he wasn't serving, would have been an exercise in superfluity, because you can't be elected more than twice to the presidency. That's not the case with Mr. Trump. He's only been elected once, and he could surely run again in 2024 unless there were a holding that he should be disqualified because he was guilty of a high crime and misdemeanor. So I do think, number one, that there is jurisdiction. They do not need 17 Republicans to sustain jurisdiction. They can sustain it with 50 Democrats plus Kamala Harris casting the 51st vote. It is uncertain whether Chief Justice John Roberts would be required to preside, as it would be in a case where you have an incumbent president. I think that's an open question. But even if he doesn't, that doesn't necessarily oust the Senate from jurisdiction, as it didn't in the case of Henry Belknap.
You know, I'm just going to talk to the American people now. I'm going to do something a little different. And I just want to raise these questions. For the last 4 years, we have just been consumed with former President Donald Trump. There's been no oxygen left in the room because of every little thing about Donald Trump. It was just everything. Why in the world would the newly elected president want to have a Senate trial where you resurrect former President Trump again, and the people who feel to this day that the election was fraudulent, you having these senators interrogate both sides? Why give fuel to their anger, their dissent? Why even bring this back to the country with all the things that Biden is trying to do and all these executive orders, which we're going to talk about later? Why even bring this back? And we talk about 17 Republicans. They're Democrats. The senator from West Virginia, Manchin, has already said he's not voting for impeachment. We like to focus on the 17 Republicans. They're not even have a coalesced number of Democrats that are going to vote for this. To keep them running for office, let democracy decide that. We don't know what's going to happen to the former president and his health, or the landscape is going to change in the next 4 years. I just don't understand, Bruce. I don't understand. It makes no sense to resurrect the former president. So again, all the news is about Donald Trump. Why? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I think, Armstrong, you've made very powerful points, but some of that, I think, has been omitted. First of all, the president has no role in the impeachment process. It's exclusively entrusted to the Senate and the House, and neither does the Supreme Court.
No role. They're trying to impeach him. What are you talking about? He has no role. No, they're trying to impeach him again. Please.
No, I'm saying that President Biden has no role in the impeachment process of the House and the Senate. That's what I'm saying. Secondly,
he has influence, Bruce. Come on. Of course he has influence.
No. Well, he has stated that it's up to the Senate, and Mitch McConnell, who is the Republican majority leader, has said he's open to it. Moreover, I think you're neglecting that there was a storming of the Capitol, a policeman was killed, there were threats to execute Mike Pence for counting the votes, the lives of both members of Congress and staff were threatened, the crowd was coming in with fire extinguishers, knives, flag poles, hockey sticks. That's not instruments of communication. Those are threats. It was an effort to overturn the election results that have been certified by 50 states. Moreover, the impeachment
but it appears
there's efforts.
It appears that it was pre-planned. It appears that it was pre-planned before Trump ever gave his speech on the lips of the White House. It was so organized. I mean, you had ladders. There was no magnetometers, no security. There's even talking about launching an investigation to understand why was the Capitol able to be penetrated so easily. It's not just Donald Trump here. It's the
That's
indictment of the entire Congress.
That's why you have trials, if there's a dispute over the evidence. But you've also omitted an element of the charges, and that is the telephone call some 40 minutes long with the Secretary of State of Georgia saying, you got to find me additional votes. They said no. He said, yeah, you could be criminally punished. Now we have the information that Mr. Trump was speaking to a lower level subordinate in the Justice Department, David Clark, and saying, will you write a letter to the Secretary of State or the Georgia legislator saying there's a criminal investigation of fraud underway in the election, which wasn't true, and he was threatening to fire Jeffrey Rosen, the acting attorney general, until all the leadership said they would resign. Those are additional efforts that show a corrupt intent to overturn the most important election we have in the United States, indeed in the whole world, President of the United States.
Biden is President of the United States. Donald Trump has gone on to the great Florida Everglades to rest and have a little peace. Why bring him back? A lot of people need a break from Trump, and they need to focus on the real issues that are impacting everyday Americans. And we'll be back. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Mike Howell from the Heritage Foundation, how in the world is canceling the Keystone Pipeline and erasing thousands of jobs? I heard some of the foremen, people of unions, they were crying to their families in the midst of Corona. They've lost their way of life. Now they cannot feed their families. And as a result of the Keystone Pipeline, gas prices are going to surge. People are going to be paying more money at the gas pump. How is that in the long run is going to do anything about climate change? Just help us understand the mindset of the president. Instead of trying to erase jobs, he should focus on adding jobs.
Right. So right now, the administration is in a period where they're just throwing everything at the wall. All these far left ideas that they campaigned on, that the far left advocacy groups have asked for over the years, they're rolling on them. So in the first day, he had 17 executive actions, one of them being the Keystone Pipeline. Canceling that right there is at least 10,000 jobs. Hundreds of people have already been laid off. And it does nothing for energy security or independence or safety. If anything, it hurts it. It's safer to transport it through a pipeline. But the problem is that the environmental alarmists out there and the advocacy groups are so fixated on the symbolic nature of the Keystone Pipeline that they had to do away from it. And the administration didn't show any spine on this one to stand up and say, you know what, we're going to protect some American jobs. They rolled over fast to the far left. The far left tail is wagging the dog of this administration early.
Amisha, obviously, I suppose you have a differing perspective on this.
Absolutely. And Armstrong, just full disclosure, during the Obama years, I worked for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. When we talk about the Keystone Pipeline, not only do we think about it in environmental awareness terms and what disasters it does actually cause for not only the quality of water, but also the quality of nature and natural resources around the pipeline, but also the fact that it drives through the homes and the livelihoods of Native Americans who have for years been protesting against it. And I think that this country owes a great deal of gratitude to the Native Americans in general, but also has to take into account the decisions that we make that harm their daily lives. This was a campaign promise from Joe Biden. This is something that Joe Biden spoke about on the stump, on the campaign trail. This is something that voters actually wanted to see. And I think that we are remiss if we continue to just listen to Republican talking points regarding this pipeline that has significant environmental issues that have been documented by scientists for decades now.
Well, I guess, Mike, Misha probably doesn't have Democratic talking points. I guess it's her perspective. But how do you push back on what she just said? Obviously, you disagree.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm working off Heritage Foundation talking points. We've been writing about this for years. And I would say your guest's point about the environmental concerns or quality of the surrounding land is a rather remote concern because they're going away from the initial argument that this would be destructive for the environment. Instead, it has been shown that the pipeline is a better alternative than putting things on rail or freight. And I won't pretend to speak for all Native Americans on this, but I can tell you this. It's not a uniform decision or opinion that's held. There's articles out there about some decrying the cancellation of it as late as today. This is an immediate impact on jobs and Americans, Native Americans, and everyone in this country. And it's unfortunate that this is such an early action. There's a reason they did this day one. It's to meld it in the entire kind of, mix it in with everything else going on. There's throwing everything at the wall very quickly that'll ultimately be very unpopular in this country because there's only so much of a limited attention span that we have to digest all of the wild things that occurred last week and are occurring this week. It's like they got into office through a far left party and just popped a piñata of the most left policies possible.
Adam, and how is raising gas taxes on everyone beneficial to all Americans?
Well, if you're not driving a car, I guess you're in good shape. To go back to all of this, Armstrong, we heard this speech of the inauguration. It was simple and classy, full of talk of unity and common purpose. And the first thing that President Biden does coming out of the box is to unilaterally declare certain things. And the Keystone Pipeline is an interesting and horrible, maybe opening sign of where things might be going, because as you recall, in the final debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden stepped in it in terms of fracking. Fracking represents the better part of 1 million jobs in America out of over 10 million in the oil and gas industry. He was so panicked after the fact, after that debate, by what he had said, or at least his handlers were, he bent over backwards to get to the media and press and say he was taken out of context. It's not going to be true. But already we see he is conceding to the left and liberal agenda early. Maybe he thinks he has to do that because he's going to need concessions from them moving forward on stimulus, things like the minimum wage increase being on the table and having to stay strong and true for the liberal base not to start to question Joe Biden's bona fides. But what a curious way to come out of a national moment of an inauguration and a feel-good speech and make half the country feel bad that what he's about to put in play were the things we most feared from the very beginning.
Amisha, I know it's easy. I know this happened with the former administration. They said Trump was catering to his base, but obviously Trump was catering for what worked for him, and his base was not always in support of what he advocated. Are these Biden's values that we're beginning to see through his executive orders? Is this the vision that he and his administration actually has for this country? Are we returning to a day of socialism and this where they just have this total distaste for capitalism? Does he not have any consideration for the 73 million people who don't necessarily, who didn't vote for him? And if you want to heal this country, you got to heal it by policies that they can embrace, which they feel is going to be better for their children, for future generations, and also for their current way of life.
Well, Armstrong, when I think about what I'm seeing from President Biden, when he is reaching back and making sure that people are safe from the threat of COVID-19, when I see everything that he's done with his point plan based on that, when I see all of his work towards racial reconciliation and what he's doing to bridge the gap and what we've seen a lot of the police brutality instances and things like that, when I see a president who is prioritizing getting the checks that the American people need so much, these emergency checks at this point to keep them afloat. When I see a president who is taking housing insecurity seriously, when I see a president who is showcasing values when it comes to our education system and what has happened with student loan debt, I think that I see a president who is listening to the American people. So I know where you're trying to go with this, and I know that Republicans are going to jump on every little thing that they believe is a problem with this administration within the first week. But I also feel as though what we're seeing right now is a step forward, a revocation of the racism that we saw from the previous administration, particularly when we're talking about the bans that they had on Muslims entering this country and things like that. We're seeing a president who is taking America seriously, who is doing what the American people want. Again, ensuring that our healthcare is where it needs to be, ensuring that we get on track from COVID-19, ensuring that the American people get these emergency checks that they need and are able to stay afloat, that their housing needs are met. Those are the things that matter to the American people.
Maybe I'm still recovering from the weekend. I'm trying to figure out how all these things that Amisha just mentioned are going to close the gap, and it's a class issue, and how all these things she just mentioned is going to help us find our way where we can put racism and bigotry and all those isms behind us. Because it seems to me what Amisha is talking about was tried on the former President Obama. It's been tried again and again. I don't see the progress. It seems as though people are more unemployed, more segregated, more angry, more divided than they've ever been. So maybe when we come back, Amisha can explain to us how all these things that she just mentioned are going to help us move beyond race. Much more when we come back on Your Voice, Your Future. I'm your moderator, Armstrong Williams.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, Call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, before we get ahead of ourselves here, you know, I would like for Bruce Fein to give us an overview of the executive orders that President Biden has executed thus far and some of the ramifications and how far-reaching they are. Bruce?
The first thing I'd want to observe is that every executive order can be overridden by Congress. They have this statutory authority to undo anything President Biden does if it's thought to be very misguided. The second thing is with regard to the executive orders. Yes, they certainly have been very prolific. And I do think that they're geared to Mr. Biden's base in the same way that the initial executive orders of Mr. Trump and his predecessors were the same way. That's what the definition of a politician is. They do things to appeal to their base, to solidify themselves politically. But some of the things that I think were most graphic, you've already discussed the Keystone Pipeline reversal. President Obama, he rejoined the World Health Organization, from which Mr. Trump had withdrawn. He rejoined the Paris Climate Pact, from which Mr. Trump had withdrawn. He has announced that he is going to be extending the START treaty on nuclear arms with the Russians for an additional 5 years that Mr. Trump had declined to do. He reversed the executive order of Mr. Trump, which was under a legal challenge, to exclude LGBTI individuals from the military forces. He's changed the definition of discrimination under the civil rights laws to permit, if not mandate, that those who have sexual orientations be accommodated accordingly with regard to restrooms and athletic facilities and things of that sort. He's issued an order requiring federal contractors to pay a minimum wage of $15. That's legally rather dubious in my judgment. That's kind of a sample, but it's a wholesale, I think, attempt to redo the face of the executive branch from Mr. Trump, which is predictable. He's a politician.
You know, Mike, from the Heritage Foundation, I think people are very reasonable, and I think treating everyone equal, not being denied any opportunity because of their sexual preference or their race. I don't know anybody that I know that would not embrace those necessary principles. But and maybe I'm misunderstanding what I read, and I've read them over the last few days. I don't understand how people have a right to become transgender. They go from man to woman to man. I'll stand up for your right. But how is it that you can allow somebody who was once a man to become a woman, and all of a sudden they decide, well, I want to play with the girls in baseball and soccer and tennis and basketball and hockey. And then they start winning all the trophies, and your parents raising their children to be athletes. They're the scholarships that are given. They're the trophies that are given. I don't understand. And I'm sure, Misha, no matter how disparate our views may be, I don't see how anybody can advocate a man, no matter how many changes you may have, you still have the physical body of a man, and it gives you an edge if you're competing in sports with women. I don't get it, Mike. Help us understand that.
Well, you're right. Most people don't get it because it's fundamentally unfair. We've seen how this plays out in schools. And for all the talk of unity, this is about as divisive of a topic you can get into. And for the first day in office to basically roll out an executive order that says boys in schools and public schools have the right to go into the girls' locker room is really third rail type stuff. As is the transgender, military ban, which is not a military ban at all. It's for people who are undergoing treatment for gender dysphoria, the mental condition where, you think your gender is different than your biological sex. It's really part of ushering in a new sexual kind of understanding for the world. And it's through these executive orders that start off in the military and push it into schools, where it's aimed at undercutting some of the norms that have served society for so well for thousands of years. And it's truly really divisive. And I don't understand why this is the highest priority for this administration.
So, Amisha, let me come back to you. Let me read something to you. Biden is refocusing on the SNAP benefits instead of helping Americans regain unemployment. Would people they prefer government, Amisha, or a good paying job to support themselves and their families? Which do they prefer?
Trump caused major problems with basically kicking people off the rolls of SNAP benefits. You are talking to a young woman who grew up on food stamps. You're talking to someone who knows what it's like to not have meals. And I think that when we have this conversation, we have to take into context that America has the largest number of children in poverty of any other nation in the developed world. When we're talking about kids who could not get meals outside of schools, we're talking about kids whose bellies lay unfilled for days at a time. This makes a difference. And I think that the Biden administration is doing both. They're moving towards jobs. They're also making sure that people are receiving unemployment benefits who were previously shut out or had limits to them. And they're also making sure that those hundreds of thousands of people who could not eat at night or provide food for their families have SNAP benefits. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. That to me shows an administration that is filled with heart, that understands what the American public is actually going through, and one that refuses to ignore.
Let me stop you. There's nothing that you just said that any decent, God-fearing man would disagree with. But what about the corruption, the exploitation, the abuse of the program, where it goes to people that don't really need it? And then people take their benefits, even in welfare lines, and you can see them with crabs in a bucket. They're trying to exchange it and barter it for money, exchange for food. How do you stop the fraud in the system?
Armstrong.
Where the real people that need it, that you just discussed, actually get it.
I hear this argument over and over again, and what we know is that SNAP benefits have some of the lowest fraud cases of any federal government program, less than 2%. So it is a null and void argument from jump.
Really? Adam, you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, this is where, and I appreciate Amisha's comments. This is where, by the way, rhetoric gives way to remedy. And sometimes the remedy is really lousy. And if you want to kind of look at the playing out of welfare, the state of our public schools, other major priorities in the Democratic portfolio, look to America's cities and ask yourself, are they better off, and have they been better off under these policies? Amisha and others talk, as long as the day is, about all the things they're trying to do. They show their heart, and I think that's something to be esteemed. But in terms of the actual, orchestration and putting into play these ideas, it's been lousy across the board in too many areas for them to be able to say with a straight face, once again with their heart on both sleeves, this is what we intend to do. And by the way, can I go back, if you don't mind, Armstrong, to something that Bruce said about presidential directives, just so the audience understands, which were first put into play in 1941. Yes, Congress can overturn a presidential directive, but with a 2/3 vote in both houses. It ain't going to happen. So these presidential directives are coming directly at us, and really there's nothing we can do about it. And I think that, again, this is a way that the president has tried to telegraph to his base that he's going to do good for them moving forward, to buy him some time in other places and on other issues where perhaps he won't be able to do as much. And the one thing I hope to leave viewers with tonight, they're looking for a sense, Armstrong, of hope in all of this conversation. There's one word we need to put into play, like our lives depend on it, and the word is compromise. Some of the greatest things that have ever happened in American history, starting with the Sherman Compromise in 1787 that established proportional representation in the House, equal representation in the Senate, the team of rivals under Lincoln, the creation of Medicare, the saving of Social Security, the development of NATO. All of these things happened because the two sides, as we'll call them, came together and compromised to the greater good. And until or unless we get that happening, not just in the halls of Congress, but we feel that and hear that from the President of the United States, who believes in it and will back it up, we're going to continue to be wrestling with things like an impeachment trial that is absolutely horribly wrong if you want us to move forward, especially against COVID-19, and is into an environment where we already are divided. So I really plead with everybody who's listening tonight to try to encourage as much as you can, whatever you support, to bring both sides together, to compromise for the greater good, to let the best ideas for America rise to the surface as opposed to the best partisan ideas for either party.
Well, you know what? Listen, we know how this game is played, and Republicans do this also. But here's what I don't understand as we go to break. I want you to chew on this. Biden and Harris has both houses of Congress. They have the Senate. They have the House. Why don't they just take his agenda to Congress for their consent, the way our framers intended to do so? Is there something that's going on with his Democratic elected chambers that makes him fearful that they're not going to support his policy? He has all the power. Why not take it to his Congress? Why doesn't he do that? Why all of a sudden? We'll talk about that when we return. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, Bruce Fein, has the executive branch become too powerful by constantly using executive orders to bypass Congress? And why not Biden wait for his majority House and Senate pass this legislation instead of using executive order?
50 years. The executive branch has never surrendered power back. When Mr. Trump came in his first 2 years, he had also a Republican Congress. First thing he did was issue his executive order banning travel from 7 largely Muslim countries. He overturned the immigration statutes, or he elaborated on them. He didn't go to Congress. I'm not singling out Mr. Trump. Mr. Biden did the same thing. Mr. Obama did the same. George Bush did the same. Presidents never, ever surrender power. The presidency has become vastly too powerful, in my judgment. We already see this. First, Mr. Obama, he does an arms control agreement with Iran by an executive agreement rather than a treaty. And now we see that Mr. Biden is going to resurrect it by an executive agreement rather than by a treaty because he knows he can't get a 2/3 vote. We have really, I think, lost in some sense the art of compromise, precisely because what's said, these decisions are not made with Congress, where you have to get a much larger consensus to reach a conclusion. The executive branch just deliberates with itself and comes forth with a fait accompli. It doesn't compromise with itself. It excludes, everyone has to be on the same page in the talking points. And that's why you get these wild, I think, swings from one angle to the next. We need to return the power to Congress. That's where it belongs constitutionally. But to be candid, I'm up there all of the time. The members don't want it. They say, we're happy to let the executive branch make the decision. If it goes south, they'll take the heat. We'll avoid having to run against a primary, and we can just be adornments and embellishments on the wall, and we'll have a nice, comfy life, and we don't have to decide anything. And that is a character I don't know how you change. I've tried very many times. They don't want to vote on tough issues, so they give it away.
So, Misha, all this that has been said tonight and debated, where does uniting the country come from? Who's going to do that?
First off, I think I agree 100% with what Bruce Fein just said. But when it comes to unity, I think that in many times we've heard this in circle after circle since the insurrection 2 weeks ago. Unity, 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 which was a conversation we didn't have 4 years ago because nobody cared about unity on the right while Trump was steadily dividing our nation and isolating us from the rest of the world. I think that when we're talking about the building of this unity and this coalition, there has to be consideration as to where America is right now and what got us here. A lot of it is our previous isolationist policies. The other part is that we are fighting the backdrop of one of the most deadly pandemics this nation has ever seen. And I think that we need to all get on one page as it relates to how we're going to move forward from it, in not only in terms of the health aspect, but also in terms of moving our economy forward. And we have to finally recognize that there are some serious issues of race that this nation has to deal with. And I know it is an ugly word around Republican circles because they just don't want to face the music when it comes to what's going on in this country. But for Black and brown people, for the longest, the policies of this nation have not necessarily benefited them. And that's policies on the left and the right. So I think that for someone like President Biden, he has to come to bear with the fact that this is a country that is moving forward. This is a country that is asking for various things that they didn't ask for during the Obama administration. There was some level of disappointment, even on the left, from things that happened 8+ years ago. And I think that at this point in this nation's history, the argument of unity, yes, it's there, but unity also comes with making sure that there's accountability. So I don't want that lost in the discussion. Unity has been used by the conservative media to totally eradicate President Trump from the responsibility of the insurrection that just happened 2 weeks ago. That we cannot do.
You know, Adam, one thing Amisha reminded me of, as much as I enjoyed President Biden's attempt to try to unify, I couldn't help but notice his little systemic, his keep interjecting the first woman, the first Black this, the first Black that, the first Black. I mean, we had the first Black president. You got the first Black Secretary of Defense. You got the first woman who's Black Vice President of the United States. We have so many firsts. I mean, how is it possible, if we keep getting these firsts and we keep making this progress, that America is still as racist as the Democrats try to make it out to be, and keep using it as red meat for their constituency?
Well, I think we need more time that's left in this program to address that fundamental question. But let me just offer this, if I could, Armstrong. When Americans went to the polls last November, they didn't vote left, they didn't vote right, they voted forward. Going to Bruce's comments, which I also think were right on point on, about the increasing power of the presidency, we wanted progress. One of the reasons Congress's approval ratings are still around 11%, which is the absolute bottom of the barrel, is they don't get things done. They're perceived just to basically talk themselves to death. They're investigating themselves into political oblivion. They're accusatory, they're finger pointing, but they're not getting things done. And so, of course, by default, if anyone is left, that would be maybe the executive branch to get something moving forward. That's where we're going to go. But this idea of unity, you can't proclaim leadership, you earn it. You can't say unity without doing the things that reinforce it. And and Misha said early on in this conversation, we're trying to pass all these judgments on President Biden so early into his administration. Fair point. But if you look at first acts as indicators of things to come, there are many things that are disquieting for 74 plus million Americans who didn't go that way. We didn't vote for transformational change. We didn't go for turning the page against and despite of everything we've ever done and everything we believe in. That's not how we voted. We voted straight down the middle. We really voted, consciously or not, for a split government. But we also are urging our leaders to get together and move forward. And by the way, COVID-19, if Joe Biden didn't, that's the one thing that this president has that is a miracle from heaven in terms of an issue where he has a chance to unify the nation and move forward, and to keep us focused on that, and to keep his allies and others away from the distractions of an impeachment trial, away from the distractions of the kinds of rhetoric or policy directives that we know are just going to flame the divisiveness that already is there. He has an opportunity to do something special, but unity is something that is not a rhetorical command. It is something that we see in practice. And I, like everyone in this program, are hopeful that the new president of the United States will be successful, do well, and listen truly to all Americans.
Adam Goodman, Mike Howell, Bruce Fein, and our very own Amisha Cross, thank you so much for the stirring, insightful, and thought-provoking conversation. When we come back, Travis Stevens, Evan Nierman, and much more on Your Voice, Your Future.
I'm William Travis Steffens. This is Our Evolution. Welcome to my world. In this series of Our Evolution, we're going to be exploring the magic of these mountains, the magic of nature, the inspiration that I've had running through my veins since I was a child, being raised on a gorgeous ranch up in the mountains, moving cows, moving sheep, life on a horse, moving into life, jumping off the edge of a cliff, life climbing the side of a cliff, and yet finding life on the edge of that comfort. You see, there's so many of us who have become comfortable and who have become stagnant in life because we're not pushing ourselves. I'm here to show you and teach you that life starts at the edge of comfort. And through nature, we're going to see how we can reunite, how we can become free thinkers again. It's these mountains that taught me how to be the CEO that I am today. It's these mountains that taught me how to be the partner that I am today. It's these mountains that have expanded my heart and my love for this country, my love for this freedom. The last year has been nothing but chaos and confusion. I'm here to help lead this country back to a place of certainty. My companies are here to lead this country back to a place of conscious capitalism. We need to unite as one yet again to pull through this uncertain time, to overcome, to adapt, and to evolve to a new level. Thank you for joining us on this journey with Our Evolution. Throughout this series, we'll be exploring how nature in the mountains can bring this to your world. And it doesn't have to be a cliff. It doesn't have to be jagged peaks. It can be a park. It can be a recreation area. It's just time to put the phones down. It's time to walk away from the social media. It's time to get back to yourself, to find the grandest version of the greatest vision that you hold for yourself, and to expand and inspire back to free thinking. Thank you for joining us on Our Evolution.
You know, I want to thank Travis Steffens for that terrific package, because we're going to talk about the issues that Americans care about, but we're also going to talk about issues that everybody can unite around, that are not always so divisive. Joining us now is His Excellency, Minister Nisar Ahmed Giryani, who's the Minister from Industry and Commerce of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. We welcome him to the broadcast. Minister Giryani, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the show.
Shakur. Thank you very much.
So talk to us about what's happening around the world, and how are you handling the pandemic, where countries are making progress? What are you doing different than what we're doing in the United States? What are you learning from the United States? And how other countries are looking at the United States now, the United States, which has always been that shining city on the hill for the world?
I'm not hear you.
Oh, God. You can't hear me. Talk about the progress that other countries. Let me just quote it. Let me go to Evan. Evan, let me come. I'll come back to the minister if we can get his audio to work. Evan, let's talk about what just happened with President Biden and his authorization of transgenders going back into the military, the ramifications from that. And also, even before we get to that point, what was the fallout? Was there anything that came out of it that was good for the military overall? When Trump overturned Obama's legislation, executive order to put this in place. Let's go back and talk about it. What has the military personnel said, and how do they feel about where is the other direction that it's going in now?
Right. It's a great question, Armstrong. It's great to be here with you this evening. And look, I think that what we've seen with the Biden administration coming in and issuing this executive order is it's a recognition that the men and women who serve, who choose to put their lives on the line for all Americans, should not be banned. They should not be discriminated against. And I think it's a good thing for America, and I think it's a good thing for the soldiers.
But there are many soldiers that welcome this executive order by President Trump, former President Trump. Are you saying that was all theater and there was no reality to many of them feeling that way, and they felt it made the military better? Are you saying that this is the policy that the military brass who are on the front line for us every day, that they fully embrace?
Well, let's be clear. Initially, when that declaration was made by former President Trump, it was a declaration made over Twitter, and then the Department of Defense was scrambling, clearly caught off guard, not expecting it. And then they spent time trying to make the policy match the tweet. Now, I think the men in charge of the military are best positioned to tell us whether or not they support a ban or not. And successive secretaries of defense have told us that it is not a problem for the military, that the men and women who are transgender, who volunteer to serve our nation, that the military leadership, the Secretary of Defense specifically, present Secretary of Defense, as well as General Mattis when he was serving, they both had the same message, which is these individuals, if they meet the standard, then they should be permitted to serve.
Well, listen, I don't think any of us want any discrimination of any kind, because you know what? People, when somebody's willing to put their life on the line and die, I think that's what matters. And I think what we should do is make everybody feel a part of the military, because you don't want to create other kind of issues within the military ranks, because they have just too much that they have to focus on in terms of the trenches, and you never know where the conflict may pop up. So I think the camaraderie in the military is very important. But Erwin, we look forward to having you on the broadcast going forward, and thank you for that report.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Armstrong. Great to talk with you.
My pleasure. So, Your Excellency, Minister Nisar Ahmed Giryani, talk about the progress that places like Afghanistan and other places around the world are making in terms of the pandemic, the COVID-19? And what have you learned from the United States, and what advice can you share with the United States?
اول خود تشکر میکنم از شما که وقت دادیم برای ملت دوست ما امریکا تبریکی میدم پیروزی بایدن و تشکر میکنم از نیروهای دفاعی امریکا که در افغانستان آمدند و به خاطر ضد تروریسم و ضد القاعده به افغانستان خون دادن به خاطر آزادی افغانستان. برای فامیلا از اونا تسلیت میگم و تشکر میکنم از کمک‌های همیشگی دولت امریکا و ملت امریکا و سنا و کانگرس که ما را همیشه سپورت کردن.
First of all, thank you very much for having us here, and I would like to congratulate the Democrats as well as particularly His Excellency Joe Biden for his recent victory. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank the families and the soldiers who sacrificed their lives for the betterness of Afghanistan. And we will always forever appreciate their sacrifices and the sacrifices of the United States of America. And I also would like to thank the American people for their extended support in terms of providing aid and support to the development of Afghanistan as a society and working towards the economic development of our nation.
COVID-19
No, let me say this. I'm having audio issues, so we're gonna have to disconnect from this. I'm so sorry. It's so wonderful having His Excellency join us, and this happens sometimes. And thank you for joining us tonight for this edition. So let me just say this as we wrap up tonight's broadcast. Everyone is talking about unity. They're talking about healing, and the president and the vice president finding common ground to unite with those Americans that did not necessarily vote for Biden-Harris. But I think it's very important that people just are very candid about this. I think many of the policies, many Americans feel that these policies that are being put in place, whether it's the SNAP program, transgenders playing in women's sports, whether it's the Keystone Pipeline and people losing their way of life and losing their jobs, whether it's a gas tax and people paying more at the pump because all prices are going to soar. What unites people is when they believe that the leader of the free world share their values and their vision for America. And I got to tell you this, and we're out on the front lines. We're all over the country talking to Americans every day, and we're on social media. And Americans don't feel, particularly in the first less than a week of the Biden administration, that they can identify with the direction he's taking the country. They don't necessarily identify with his value system. And maybe Biden is just doing this because he wants to satisfy his base. Maybe it's theater, and there's not going to be any real teeth to it. And maybe the Congress is going to save him from some of these actually being long-lasting legislation and laws. We'll just have to see. But you got to find and meet the American people halfway in their value system and the policies that you're putting in place. I want to thank all of our guests for joining us for this edition of Your Voice, Your Future. Greg Massani, WJLA 24/7, Aaron Adine. Thank you. God bless you.